Before we can develop a deeper understanding about human teleology, which deals with questions of our life's purpose, we first need to understand how such propositions of meaning are usually generated and deconstructed. With proposition of meaning, I refer to claims of things that are supposed to be meaningful. So far, we have discussed the psychological avenues of subjective meaning-making mechanisms and what knowledge we currently have about them from scientific investigations. These studies can help us understand how the perception and awareness of meaning can be modeled. It provides empirical insight into how people see their purpose in life as a purely subjective phenomenon. Philosophically speaking, though, this is not a troubling question. If you want to know how people generate purpose in their lives, just go and ask them. This is what scientists do and how they arrive at their models. It is certainly hard work, but from a philosophical point of view, the difficult question arising is not primarily how people generate meaning for themselves on a subjective level, but what an objective meaning of life is supposed to look like, if such a thing actually exists. So, the first question must be, can objective meaning even exist? In order to get into the mechanics of how meaningful statements are produced and how they are properly criticized, we need to have a look at the critical method of transcendation, or sometimes I just call it the critical method. Once we have the tools of this method in hand, we can wrestle with the more interesting question whether it is possible to create lasting propositions of meaning. The critical method is actually quite easy to understand because it is just a formal way to talk about something we usually do rather intuitively. Let me make an example of how this idea works. Imagine you try to think about something that might appear really meaningful to you. Say, something that makes you happy. Now, is happiness per se something meaningful? Yeah, why not? If something makes you happy, then it certainly doesn't seem to be bad. So it's a good thing. And if it's a good thing, then who is to say that this isn't meaningful? No, let's not just leave it as a question. Let's be bold enough to actually make it a claim. Happiness is meaningful. The pursuit of happiness is then something that provides meaning to our lives. Or, to put it in philosophical terms, we postulate that the pursuit of happiness is our first proposition of meaning. Later, we will learn that such propositions of meaning can be modeled along ascending dimensions as objects of meaning. But for now, let's leave it at that. Claiming that the pursuit of happiness is a proposition of meaning is a fancy way of saying that happiness itself is meaningful. And most of us would agree, right? What could be more meaningful than becoming happy? Isn't happiness pretty much the definition of meaning? Well, wait a second. If happiness is what constitutes meaningness, then there is a lot that isn't adequately addressed with this. Many valuable things get ignored by this exaggerated focus on happiness. Think about Mother Teresa, for example. She lived almost all through the 20th century and has been declared a Catholic saint because of her incredibly selfless life. She was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in Calcutta, India. She was working with the poor, the homeless, the sick, and the dying. Do you think she was always happy to kneel head over heels in the mud and to invest her whole being in that mess? Can you actually make yourself believe that happiness is the emotion she was immersed in when crying with the poor? No, happiness is not the word that we can choose for this. Much the opposite. It must be horrible, I think. Happy looks different. But is it any less meaningful? Is it fair to say that this is not a life that makes blissfully happy and therefore it is not filled with a purpose? Can we really go this far? Well, I think you don't see it that way, right? I don't assume that you would look at Mother Teresa's life and think that it is utterly meaningless. In fact, for many of us, it's quite the opposite. Her life appears to be more meaningful than the ones who have it all, do it all, and could chill through it all. happy, content, and without any sorrows. It's interesting, isn't it? It feels like happiness is something inherently meaningful and perhaps even a defining factor for purpose itself. But upon closer inspection, meaning is something entirely different. It goes way deeper than just happiness. You can rid yourself of all the pleasures you have, but still appear to have a very meaningful life. A mother going through hardships to care for her child, a soldier fighting for a higher cause, a nurse working hard to look after a dying patient, or a believer who is being physically persecuted only because he is standing up for what he believes in. These things are not meaningless. Much to the contrary, they seem to be way more meaningful than the simple pleasures of life that may render us cheerfully happy and content. So it works the other way around. Meaning can be a source for happiness, but the latter is not ipso facto the basis for the former. What I want to say with this is simple. Meaning is not the same as happiness. It is much more than this. So we can conclude that happiness is not necessarily the ultimate meaning for our lives. And just like that, we have deconstructed and transcended happiness as a steadfast answer to the problem of our teleology. Let's make another example. Imagine that you stand next to a road, drinking your favorite coffee. It's not any coffee, it's your favorite coffee from your single most favorite place. Let's even make it the best coffee you ever had in your entire life. But just as you take your next sip, you see a little child on the street. The child is cheerful and playful, but it doesn't see that there is an oncoming school bus that will most definitely hit the child and, from all you can tell, will certainly kill it. What do? You could save the child, and most likely even without getting harmed yourself. But doing so would require you to toss the coffee and jump on the street to save the child. But it's the best coffee you ever had, right? Should you really throw it away? Is saving the child more meaningful than enjoying this amazing hot cup of deliciousness? Now, I don't think that you have any qualms about this example. It's easy. Of course, I guess you would say everybody has to toss the stupid cup and run on the street as quickly as possible. If someone would disagree, you would probably label this person a sociopath. But why is this so easy for us? Well, there are many reasons for why the child's life is more valuable than the coffee, but one thing is clear. It certainly is more valuable, and hence it is a lot more meaningful to save the child than to enjoy the caffeinated drink. And just like that, we have transcended the meaningfulness of the act of drinking the coffee with the act of saving the child. The latter becomes more meaningful to us, and the former appears rather meaningless next to it. Would anything you do today still matter tomorrow? Maybe yes, but would it in a million years? Maybe not. So we transcend the time span of a day with the scope of a million years, which renders the significance of anything you do in a given day moot and comparatively meaningless. The psychologist Jordan Peterson once said that any idiot can choose a frame of time within which nothing matters, and that this is a cheap trick of the rational mind. Now, it's true that we can get easily lost in such difficult questions, but it is still a real and perfectly valid question of the rational mind that I think must be tackled in all seriousness. Things that are more meaningful on a lower context become less so on a higher level, as they are superseded by things that appear to be more meaningful in a higher context. This is pretty much how the critical method works. Lower level propositions of meaning are transcended by higher ones. There is actually a whole lot more to the critical method than just that. But I hope that in these short minutes I was able to convey the very basic ideas behind it. If you actually want to know what the critical method of transcendation is really about, then feel free to throw a glimpse into my book, Discovering the Meaning of Life, which dives into the discussion a bit more thoroughly. If we want to discover a meaning that could be called objective and ultimate, then we need to find something that is properly immune to the critical method, because otherwise it will always be deconstructed, and as such, any idea of what could be meaningful inevitably collapses under the weight of its criticism. In my book, I outline 3 arguments, and I propose that they give us a solution to this exact problem. They are called the argument from primary effects, the argument from supremacy, and the argument from relational absolutes. Together, they pave the way for the possibility of true and objective purpose. And this is exactly what we will look at in the next episode. Stay curious.